There were 7 finalists in the final round of oratorical declamation. In 7th place, from Charleston, Amy Daniels. In 6th place, from Hayworth, Grace Glenn. In 5th place, from Oaklawn Community High School, Leonardo Quezada. In 4th place, from Belleville West, Divine Moncure. Third place in oratorical declamation, from Glenbrook North High School, Claire Symington. Your tournament runner-up in oratorical declamation is Thomas Tang from Thornton High School. And your tournament champion, Noah Eisfelder from Evanston High School. And your state champion in declamation, Noah Eisfelder.
Let me start by talking about success rates. And I'll use baseball for this first example. Baseball is filled with statistics. I'm going to focus on one stat that I hope a lot of you have heard of, batting average. So when we talk about a batter who bats 300, that means that player hits safely 3 out of 10 at-bats. Do you know what we call a 300 hitter? Good, right? Really good. Maybe an all-star. Now let's talk about success rates in the world of medicine. Suppose one of you has an appendicitis, and you're referred to a surgeon who's batting 200 on appendectomies. But, you know what? She's doing a lot better this year. She's on the comeback trail, and she's batting 257. Okay. Obviously, that's an extreme example. But let me ask you a question. What do you think the batting average for a cardiac surgeon, or a nurse practitioner, or a paramedic is supposed to be? 1,000, right? That's what it should be. Now, the truth is, nobody in all of medicine knows what a good surgeon or physician is supposed to bat. What we do, though, is we send each one of them out into the world with the expectation, be perfect. Never, ever, ever make a mistake. So I came out of medical school with the impression that if I just memorized everything, that it would immunize me against making mistakes. And it worked. For a while. Until I met Mrs. Drucker. It's hard for us to talk about our mistakes. And that's especially true in a field where making those mistakes can have such huge consequences. Brian Goldman has been an emergency physician for over 20 years, and in his TED Talk, he argues that we need to rethink how we see mistakes in medicine. Doctors make mistakes. Can we talk about that? By Brian Goldman. I was a resident when Mrs. Drucker was brought to the emergency department. She was breathless. And so I listened to her chest with a stethoscope, and she was making crackly sounds on both sides, which told me that she was in congestive heart failure. And that wasn't a difficult diagnosis to make. So I set to work treating her. I gave her aspirin, medications to relieve the strain on her heart, and over the next hour and a half or two, she started to feel a lot better. And I felt really good. And that was when I made my first mistake. I sent her home. And actually, I made 2 more mistakes. I sent her home without speaking with my attending. I didn't pick up the phone. But the third mistake I made was worse. In sending her home, I disregarded this little voice deep down inside that was trying to tell me, Goldman, not a good idea, don't do this. But I signed the papers, and paramedics took her home, and I went back to work. And at the end of the day, I packed up, and I did something I don't usually do. I walked through the emergency department on my way home. And it was there that a nurse came up to me and said 3 words that are the 3 words most emergency physicians I know dread. Do you remember? Do you remember that patient you sent home? Well, she's back. Well, she was back all right. About 1 hour after I'd sent her home, she collapsed. And her family called 911, and paramedics brought her back to the hospital, where she was in severe shock, barely breathing. And they pulled out all the stops. They gave her medications to raise her blood pressure. They put her on a ventilator. And I was shocked and shaken to the core. And I went through this roller coaster because over the next 2 or 3 weeks, it became clear that she was never going to wake up. She had irreversible brain damage. And about 9 days later, they let her go. Over the next 2 or 3 weeks, I experienced for the first time the unhealthy shame that exists in our culture of medicine. You know that healthy shame when you betray a best friend's secret and you get busted and he confronts you and you have these horrible discussions, but at the end of it all, that sick feeling guides you. And you say, I will never make that mistake again. That's the kind of shame that is a teacher. The unhealthy shame I'm talking about is the one that makes you so sick inside. It's the one that says, not that what you did was bad, but that you are bad. And that was what I was feeling. Slowly but surely, it lifted. I began to think that maybe I could feel better again. And I made myself a bargain that if I just redouble my efforts to be perfect and never make another mistake again, please make it stop. And it did. And I went back to work until it happened again and again and again. And I'd like to be able to say that my worst mistakes only happened in the first 5 years of practice, as many of my colleagues say, which is total BS. Some of my doozies have been in the last 5 years. Here's the problem. If I can't talk about my mistakes, how can I share them with my colleagues so they don't do the same thing? If I were to walk into a room filled with my colleagues right now and start to tell them what I've just told you, they would start to get really uncomfortable. Someone would crack a joke and we would move on. That's the system that we have. It's a complete denial of mistakes. It's a system in which there are 2 kinds of physicians. Those who make mistakes and those who don't. Those who can't handle sleep deprivation and those who can. Those who have lousy outcomes and those who have great outcomes. We have this idea that if we just drive the people who make mistakes out of medicine, what will we be left with but a safe system? But there's one problem with that. We work in a system where errors happen every day. 1 in 10 medications is either the wrong prescription or the wrong dosage. Hospital-acquired infections are becoming more and more numerous. Sleep deprivation is absolutely pervasive. Given all that, mistakes are inevitable. So if you take the system, as I was taught, and weed out all the error-prone health professionals, there won't be anybody left. What we need is a redefined medical culture in which we recognize that human beings run the system. And when human beings run the system, they will make mistakes. So the system is evolving to create backups that make it easier for us to detect those mistakes and to foster places where everyone who's observing in the healthcare system can actually point out things that could be potential mistakes. And especially people like me. When we do make mistakes, we are rewarded for coming clean. My name is Brian Goldman. I'm a redefined physician. I'm human. I make mistakes. I'm sorry about that. But I strive to learn one thing from what happened that I can pass on to other people. And let me close with 3 words of my own. I do remember.